All right, today we are going to dive into one of the most, frankly, disturbing chapters in American history. We're talking about Project MKUltra. This was the CIA's top secret and deeply illegal program to achieve mind control. It's a wild story of Cold War paranoia, absolute power corrupting absolutely, and horrific experiments on unsuspecting citizens. Just let that sink in for a second. That's not from a movie. That's a real quote from a real CIA agent who was working on this project. It just perfectly sums up the completely lawless attitude they had. The people running MKUltra truly believed they were above the law, and that belief had devastating, deadly consequences. So how in the world did something this crazy even get started? Well, to understand MKUltra, you have to transport yourself back to the early days of the Cold War. It was an era of intense, suffocating paranoia, where the CIA was desperate for any edge, any advantage at all, over the Soviet Union.
Yeah, a program like this doesn't just spring up out of nowhere. It actually had its roots in Nazi experiments from World War II. And, believe it or not, through something called Operation Paperclip, the US government actually recruited some of those very same scientists. The work evolved through early CIA programs like Project Artichoke, which messed with hypnosis and addiction, until finally, in 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles gave the official green light to MKUltra.
But why? What was the big motivation? In a word, fear. The agency was totally convinced that its enemies had already cracked the code on brain warfare and were using it on American POWs in Korea. So MKUltra became this frantic, desperate race to catch up. A race against an enemy that, frankly, may not have even existed. So, the stage is set. Let's pull back the curtain and take a look at what was actually happening inside this project. And make no mistake, this wasn't some small rogue operation. This was a massive, well-funded, and highly organized government program.
So at its core, what was it? MKUltra was the CIA's hunt for a perfect truth serum, for a way to manipulate people, a way to control the human mind. The man they put in charge of this dark quest was a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, and his team was basically given a blank check to explore any means necessary to, quote, crush the human psyche.
And the methods they used? I mean, just look at this list. They were absolutely brutal. We're talking about secretly dosing people with huge amounts of LSD, extreme electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, flat-out psychological and physical torture. The whole goal was to see if they could completely break down a person's mind, just shatter it into pieces, and then rebuild it in a way the CIA could control. And they poured a ton of money into this, $25 million. Now that may not sound like a huge number today, but back then, that's the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars. This wasn't some side project, it was a major government priority. And the program's reach was, well, it was vast. This wasn't all happening in some secret CIA dungeon. The agency used front organizations to secretly funnel money to over 80 different institutions. We're talking major universities, hospitals, and prisons all across the US and Canada. And the really scary part? Many of the doctors and researchers had no idea their work was actually for the CIA. So the big question is, who were the guinea pigs for these horrifying experiments? Well, the answer is just as grim as the methods themselves. You honestly can't make this stuff up. One of the most infamous sub-projects was called Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA literally set up and ran brothels in San Francisco. They'd have sex workers lure Len back, secretly drug their drinks with LSD, and then agents would sit behind one-way mirrors with a cocktail and just watch what happened. This quote from a CIA officer really says it all. The program went after, in their own words, quote, people who couldn't fight back. They deliberately targeted the most vulnerable people in society, patients in mental hospitals, prisoners, drug addicts, people who couldn't fight back and who no one would believe anyway. In one horrific case, they gave a mental patient in Kentucky LSD for 174 days straight. And what's just staggering is the hypocrisy of it all. This was happening just a few short years after the Nuremberg trials, where the US helped prosecute Nazi doctors for unethical human experiments. The number one rule that came out of those trials, the Nuremberg Code, is that voluntary consent is absolutely essential. And the CIA just completely ignored it. And the program's reach went beyond the US border. In Montreal, the CIA secretly funded a well-known psychiatrist, Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. He conducted these terrifying experiments where he would try to erase his patients' memories with drug cocktails and massive electroshocks. Then he'd try to reprogram them by playing recorded messages on a loop for weeks on end. Many of his patients were left permanently, catastrophically brain damaged. Because of all the secrecy, the true human cost of MKUltra was hidden for decades. But one story, one death, eventually broke through the silence and put a face to the program's deadly consequences. His name was Frank Olson. He was a U.S. Army scientist who was working with the CIA. In 1953, he was at a CIA retreat when Sidney Gottlieb himself spiked his drink with LSD. Olson had no idea what had happened to him and suffered a complete psychological breakdown. 9 days later, he fell to his death from the 13th floor of a New York hotel. The CIA told his family it was a tragic suicide. But that wasn't the full story. His family never believed the official version. They fought for decades to uncover the truth. Finally, in 1994, his body was exhumed. A forensic team found evidence that he had been struck on the head before the fall, leading his family and many others to believe that Frank Olson was murdered to keep him quiet. The Olson case was just the tip of the iceberg. The entire program was designed to be denied. So when it was finally threatened with exposure, the CIA did exactly what you'd think they'd do. They tried to erase it from history. Okay, picture this. It's 1973. The Watergate scandal is exploding all over Washington. The CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, gets very nervous and gives a simple order: destroy every single file related to MKUltra. He wanted to make sure no one would ever know what they'd done. And just like that, most of the records were burned. But they missed some. In an almost unbelievable twist of fate, around 20,000 pages of documents survived. Why? Because they'd been accidentally misfiled in a financial records building and were just overlooked. A simple clerical error ended up changing history. Those surviving documents were the smoking gun. In 1975, a congressional investigation called the Church Committee started digging into CIA abuses. And that's when the American public heard the name MKUltra for the first time. The discovery of those 20,000 pages gave everyone a horrifying glimpse into what their own government had been doing in secret. But even with these incredible revelations, the full story of MKUltra is still shrouded in mystery. It leaves behind a legacy of deep distrust and a ton of unanswered questions. The legacy of MKUltra is, well, it's profound. It's the textbook example of a secret government program going completely off the rails. It has fueled decades of conspiracy theories, inspired pop culture like Stranger Things, but its real tragic legacy is the unknown number of lives it completely destroyed. And this brings us to the final, haunting conclusion. This quote from the 1977 Senate report that investigated the program really says it best. Because the CIA deliberately burned the evidence, we are left wondering, how many people were really experimented on? How many lives were ruined? How many people died? The full, terrible truth of Project MKUltra is something we may never, ever know.